It was a couple of nights ago when I was sitting here and thinking about things, and I came to the realization that the United States is going down the drain, or rather, is the equivalent of a sinking ship. And it's that way economically, it's that way socially, it's that way in pretty much every aspect other than technology. Technology will continue to increase and boost. That's the one positive during all of this. But let's start with the political stuff because that's the hardest part for people to understand. Now, I've specified before I consider myself to be a independent liberal, someone who is not identifying with either parties and has a set of beliefs and an ideology that they stay consistent with in terms of who they support and who they choose to be opposed to. Now, I've criticized Trump a number of times on the channel, but I've always made clear that I don't say this from the perspective of some lover of Democrats. I think that party is corrupt, just like the Republicans. I think both are in the pockets of corporations and defense contractors. That was the main argument I was trying to make when they both voted primarily for this 717 billion military spending bill. That they did it after taking bribes from defense contractors, and politicians are allowed to have bribes from Citizens United, this Supreme Court ruling from 2010. So that's a kind of simple concept to get, that we've legalized bribery, with Citizens United ruling that giving a politician loads and loads of money is the equivalent of free speech. And sure enough, the judges that have actually, if you look at the Kavanaugh situation, the main reason I opposed him wasn't even Roe versus Wade. It was the fact that I believe it was over 7% of the time he sides with corporations. And due to Citizens United allowing people in these high-profile positions to take bribes and cite that as free speech, he's allowed to do that. So it's all part of a little game where you scratch my back, I scratch yours. Now, this is bad because it means that the politicians serve the interests of their donors first. That's why we had the corporate tax cuts back in December. That's why we had this military bill. And when you try to explain this to people, they have this thing where they can't seem to recognize that a number of the politicians across, whether it's California, Texas, New York, are there for the purpose of fulfilling the agenda of whatever donor they primarily have. Case in point, I spent a number of days speaking to self-proclaimed Cruz supporters who's up for re-election in November, and I think he'll win. But when I was talking to them, I tried explaining that Cruz is a guy who went to Harvard, which by itself does not make him corrupt, but who has a wife that works for Goldman Sachs, and he's able to get these lower income, middle income, rural Texas voters to think that he's on their side by putting on a cowboy hat, speaking with a little bit of a twang to his voice, and decking himself in these social issues like abortion and religious affairs. Even though him being religious is hypocritical because I'm supposed to believe God would approve of taking away people's health care, but whatever. Which, by the way, that's another statistic we'll get into. So you see the mask that this Manchurian candidate is able to put on, and that's not him in particular. They all do this. It's the same thing with Feinstein and Harris, these two California senators. The point I'm making is that you have a majority of people who don't want to recognize it, or if they do, they try to pretend the person that they like is not part of it. That's why with the guy that Cruz is running against, a lot of the people who don't like the other guy have invented stories about him being bought out by George Soros, when you actually have fact checkers who've proved that claim. And you can't tell these people that's not true, or come up with an actual reliable source to dispel your claim or to prove your claim, support your assertion, because they know that they're looking for any reason to make their person appear to be the best all around. They're not being objective about this. And look, it was very hard for me at first to accept that both parties were actively trying to screw me over. But I accepted it because the evidence was too great. So that by itself is problematic. Now, going over to the economic part. I've talked about the House of Cards economy that you see Trump bragging about. And one of the things you have to understand is that the buybacks from these stockbrokers are what is making the economy appear to be good. The facts are that you have 43% of the homeless working and still unable to afford a house, 76% of Americans living paycheck to paycheck, 63% unable to afford a $1,000 emergency, 29 million people without health insurance. These are serious issues that do not fall strictly on the feet of Trump. You see, I can completely understand the idea that a percentage of that group does things to actively screw themselves over. You're never going to get that to 0%. But to suggest that such large portions of the population are all there because they made bad choices and everything was their fault is just not true. Wells Fargo, we're coming across the 2-year anniversary of it, fired 5,000 people. But that was the fault of the employees. Everybody was just not working as hard as they could. And so when you talk about making, because people will say, "Oh, well, you're trying to ask for a handout for everyone that is affected by this." And my response is, okay, well, if we're not going to do welfare, which I could kind of go either way on, why don't we have a jobs program? Why don't we increase the wages? Oh no, if we increase the wages, the prices of everything will go up. These people say this as if price controls don't exist. You see, if you have a governor who is not beholden to donors, who want to pay people as little as they can while working them as much as they can, they will implement a pay raise at the same time as they implement a price control. There's simultaneous bills that coincide with each other. And that's a very simple concept to understand, but people don't want to comprehend this because it goes against the narrative they have in their head, which is that everyone is where they are because they deserve to be there. I got news for you. Most people in society are in their position due to another person. And what's even crazier is that the same people who are supporting this pull yourself up by your bootstraps narrative are the same people who back a president who literally was only ever rich because his father worked for that money. And I'm not blaming Trump for that necessarily, but let's keep it real. These people that achieve high profile positions usually are where they are because some relative started them in that position. Same thing with me. It's nothing to be ashamed of, and there are actually multiple high-profile politicians that do actually make it on their own. But you get the idea. So to tell me as a person who's watching you sit here and the person who literally is only where they are because of their parent is just nonsense. But again, that goes back to the hysteria and nonsense, that ridiculousness that people are choosing to implement. Now let's go a little bit further, and that's also one of the key points I'm trying to explain here, that these issues are very solvable in that you can have politicians, if they're not bought out, who change things, but you have to factor in the lack of attention span. So for example, I predict this video, unless I go out and just mass share it like I did with the military bill, will probably get 20, 30, 40 views, 50. I would say 60 is the cap-off point. Nowhere around 80 or 90 or 100. That's just how it is. And most people that see it, even if they agree with it, aren't going to share it with loads and loads of people to make it go viral or blow up and suddenly expose all the injustices to loads of people. Or to as many as they can. That's just the way this works. So I say that with the understanding of this. I'm just presenting you the alternative of having information you can use and take if you want. But that being said, there's also a population of individuals who do not actively follow elections. And they're significant because they're the ones who are going to be the determining factor in anything. And when they don't know who a candidate is, much less their positions, they find themselves voting for the higher known person. So for example, in my opinion, as far as corruption is concerned, the best candidate in the last California Senate election was Allison Hartson, as well as David Hildebrand, if I'm getting his name correct. And the two of them, I think, together got less than 4% of the vote in the primary. And Feinstein, the incumbent Democratic senator over here, was able to get 1 million people to vote for her. Now, that number by itself isn't that impressive because there are 39 million people in the state, but you get the idea. The one who had the most name recognition that most people knew about found themselves able to get the support. And why did most people know about that person? Because 90% of the time, the person who has the most money wins the election because they're able to buy out ads, buy out billboards, find ways to expose themselves to larger segments of the population. This is just the reality of these elections, but that's why it becomes much more difficult for someone that's not part of that same rigged, screwed up system to make headway, to actually be known and shown around the world, or rather around the state, at least to enough people to where they can get their message out and have a realistic shot of winning. A lot of people get discouraged by, oh man, this person's only going to get like 5, 10. I don't have that personally, which is why I voted for her, but you get the idea. It's a thing in people of wanting to be with the winner, the perceived person who can actually, stand up and carry this out. So that system is screwed up as well. But when we talk about these social issues, and you look at the fact that Trump's done nothing about them, and the fact that he still has supporters, that destroyed a lot of the hope I had in humanity. You see, I think I used to believe that a lot of people, if you tried to sit them down and have an actual dialogue or conversation about why something is bad, and showed statistics or something to go along with what you were saying, so it wasn't just all this hyperbole about, oh, this is going to collapse and this one, blah, blah, blah. You could get someone to say, okay, yeah, that is screwed up. I'm not going to support this. I've mentioned before, I have 3 people I speak with, and 2 of them are not active followers of elections. And with both of them, there are these independents who, if you give enough proof of something to them, they can come over and say, yeah, that's messed up. Let me join this side or this part of the team. And so when I go and I look at a lot of the people who are active on social media that call themselves Democrats or Republicans, they're not my kind of voters because they stick to one issue. I'll give you an example. This person was talking about the one of these elections, and he said his 2 top issues that he was concerned about were immigration and taxes. Now, he's got a choice between someone who's not corrupt, someone who is corrupt. Person who is corrupt is supporting ICE and all this other stuff. And look, nativist nonsense aside, most issues that Americans are going to have will be here regardless of how many illegal immigrants come. Most Americans are killed by another American, and all of their problems are typically made by someone that lives in the U.S. We've had polling data to suggest that the jobs that are taken by illegal immigrants are not wanted by regular people. So really that is a topic that is only at this point supported in its priority by nativists. So when I see him sit there and harp on about this topic in taxes, I become convinced, okay, talking to this person's a waste of time because their priorities are screwed up. They're really going to allow this corrupt individual to sit in office and do nothing for them for another 6 years for the purpose of trying to make sure a group of people that are already fleeing terrible conditions have even more terrible conditions when they come over here. So it's all part of that, where either the attention span isn't there at all, which is how it is with it seems like most people, or the priorities are screwed up. So it's just this thing where you have a plurality of people being unwilling to put themselves into realizing that you're getting screwed, that the political system is messed up, and that it is having a daily effect on the lives of the people that live in the United States. And until they're able to recognize that when you have someone who's not prioritizing doing something for a plurality of the people. I mean, for God's sakes, this is a country where 71% of people support Roe versus Wade, and we're worried that we're going to get a judge who not only is going to repeal that, but might turn out to be a rapist. Now ask yourself, what particular democracy are you living in where your representatives can put someone like that in power in lieu of the public supporting positions that he is opposed to. That topic by itself should really be a testament to just how screwed up things are. Medicare for All, for example, over 80% of Democrats back that, 57% of Republicans support that, and nothing. No Republican politician is endorsing Medicare for All. And no one's writing them, no one's staging a mass protest. Large segments of the population aren't going up to the office and demanding that they switch none of it. And again, all of this could be changed. There is so much optimism that I have for what could be done, but it is surrounded by realism that it won't be done, and that's because people have been taught from a young age, and also just from like their daily lives, to not be concerned with this stuff, to not look beyond the cable news networks and their headlines and segments. I was going to, and I still might talk about this story, where the Secretary of State supported continuing to kill people in Yemen as a result of wanting the defense contractors to get money from the bombing, the sales of these weapons. In what other civilized country would they be barbaric enough to say, oh yeah, it's okay for us to kill loads and loads of people just so long as we get some coins, and no one's protesting this. No one is saying, okay, this is screwed up, these are all problems that need to be, nothing. That's why Trump, after having all of the problems I've mentioned going on from Obama to him, is still very likely to get reelected. Is still very likely to have that 35+% of people still going, yep, this is great. I've made this joke, he could manure on them and they would still go, oh, this is good. Defecating in my lap, that's great. That's how ridiculous all of this is. So if you like what I've had to say here, share, comment. The U.S. is going down the drain.